Me and the Friday the 13th franchise go back a long time, over a week by my count, and it's been a rocky road.
Now, if you were a flavor of ice cream, what would it be?
Rock and roll.
Hey!
The way I remember Friday the 13th is that it had a killer named Jason Voorhees in it. You might have heard of him, wears a hockey mask, holds a machete. Then I watched the movie, and the killer is some lady, Mrs. Voorhees. So I have to watch the sequel, and I'm told this guy is Jason, but he's wearing a sack over his head. All I want is the Jason Voorhees I remember from when I was a kid. My Halloween isn't complete without him. So we're gonna give this one more try. Hopefully, third time's a charm. Let's see with Friday the 13th, Part 3. The movie begins with a brief recap of how Part 2 ended, something we don't see that much of anymore, but I kinda love the idea, especially with a franchise like this that was doing annual releases. These movies are best enjoyed as a communal experience. There's something to sitting in an auditorium full of people, not just to enjoy a new movie, but to enjoy the continuation of a story as an annual ritual. It has the same feeling as a holiday. Tonight is the night we all find out what new and creative ways Jason has come up with to skewer teens. The recap ends after Ginny puts the machete in Jason's shoulder. It doesn't include the possibly a dream sequence ending. Instead, we see Jason beginning to recover from his wound. Cue some pop out of the screen credits. Well, the credits don't actually pop out of the screen, they're just animated to give that impression. So no, you don't have to put the glasses on quite yet. That's right, after the profits of Part 2, a Part 3 was inevitable, but how to keep things fresh. They knew audiences weren't coming to these movies for the story, so they also knew the fresh angle had to come from the technical side. They got the idea to incorporate 3D thanks to a trend that had recently started. Well, it'd be more appropriate to say the trend returned. Of course, 3D was a thing in the 50s until it mostly died out in the 60s, but in 81, coming at ya, a 3D comedy western from Spain hit big, and once again, 3D was a thing. Friday the 13th Part 3 was theatrically released using polarized 3D, but for home release, you can get the anaglyph version, meaning it'll work with those cardboard red and blue glasses. I got 5 on Amazon for $3.99, so I have a few extras if anyone needs to borrow one, and you're gonna need them to fully enjoy this video. So what's the story this time? Is someone reopening Camp Crystal Lake? Maybe reopening the camp counselor training ground next to Crystal Lake? No, don't be ridiculous. The justification this time for Jason's soon-to-be victims gathering by his lake is far dumber than you can imagine, but we aren't there yet. First, Jason, fresh off a machete to the shoulder, wanders to a nearby store and helps himself to some clothes drying outside. The movie already feels different from parts 1 and 2, getting out of POV and instead using quick shots of Jason walking, partially obscured. It feels more like Michael Myers. There's also the floatier camera. According to 3D supervisor Martin J. Sadoff, director Steve Miner never wanted the camera to feel stable. He wanted it to move, to have a horror feel. So they decided to shoot on a Luma crane, a relatively new invention at the time that put the camera on a long, remote-controlled arm. It was much cheaper and easier than the old method of having a camera operator physically sitting on the end of a crane. But they ran into a lot of issues with that crane, like one day where they put the Luma on a big track that collapsed, sending the crane flying and damaging it. Apparently the crew had t-shirts made one day that read on them, "I hate the Luma." After Jason helps himself to the fresh clothes, the store owners, Harold and Edna, are in for some scares. She notices the figure walking around and assumes it's Harold. But really, Harold is busy feeding the fish, which reminds him eating is awesome. He eats some of the fish food, some peanuts, a donut. Classic Harold.
Didn't I feed you enough for supper?
Then he goes to put his pet rabbit back in the cage when he finds one of the other rabbits dead. Who would do such a thing? Not Jason, it was a snake. Which almost feels like a wink toward the last movie, and the debate over whether or not Jason killed the dog, Muffin. He totally did. At the sight of the snake, Harold is, as the screenplay puts it, literally scared shitless. Harold races out of the shed, holding his stomach with both hands. And yes, he goes straight for the bathroom.
It's all that crap you've been stuffing
yourself with.
You can tell the movies gave up any pretense of taking themselves seriously by this point. He goes to the bathroom, and the movie makes sure we hear all the sounds of the process. You know, for realism. At least they didn't make it one of the in-your-face 3D scenes, though Jackass 3D would finally deliver on that promise only 28 years later. Click the card in the upper right corner for that video. Not for the 3D excrement, I meant for 28 years later. Though, according to a lot of people, the two are one and the same. As Harold completes his movement, he notices, movement, I gotta get past this scene. Harold stands up and Jason whacks him in the chest with a cleaver. Edna comes looking for him and Jason stabs her through the back of the neck with a knitting needle. Cut to some friends prepping for a week in the country. But first, some kids are playing baseball, so one of them can wave the bat in front of the camera for a second. Hold on, let's do it in 3D. Yeah, that is sweet. You know how if you hold a finger or some other object right between your eyes, you kind of go cross-eyed automatically and your head feels weird? It's like that, but more. So awesome. But it is part of the fun of watching the movie today. Make it a game. Take a shot every time something is pointlessly thrown or shoved into the camera. I'd say drink responsibly, but I know my audience. Oh my god, behind them is a killer nerd? It's just Shelley, this is his thing, pranking people with home-brewed makeup effects. Except the only tricks he can think of are pretending to be a killer or pretending to be killed, so he pretty much always pisses people off. The character is the quintessential nerd outcast. But unlike most movies that show you in the end how these overlooked outcasts have something to offer if you get to know them, Friday the 13th Part 3 takes the bold stance. No, they are annoying, self-titled, whiny who never know when to quit. The actor Larry Zerner is great though. He quit acting a few years after the movie and became an entertainment lawyer, but he talks passionately and knowledgeably about the Friday the 13th franchise. As with prior F-13 movies, that's what the cool kids are calling them, the characters are barely characters, more stereotypes. But this movie exaggerates those qualities even more, so at least the characters stand out, so I can actually differentiate between them. There are the potheads, for shame. There's Debbie, the pregnant one, something the movie tells you a couple of times at the start, but never brings up again.
We would have been there already if some people didn't have to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes.
That's what happens when you're pregnant.
Oh,
No way, we're pregnant, remember?
It never does anything with that information. It's like Alice and Steve's relationship in the first movie. You're told they're boyfriend and girlfriend, or she's pregnant, and it just sits there as a piece of irrelevant information. Like, okay, thank you for telling me that. I did not know that. Actually, this gives me a flashback to years ago when I worked in an office. We'd had sensitivity training and talked about what to say if someone tells you they're pregnant, because congratulations could be considered presumptuous, but they never told us the right answer, so it was left ambiguous. Then one day, my worst nightmare, two women, let's call them Vera and Debbie. It already started off weird because Debbie didn't say that she's pregnant. Vera just suddenly turns to me and goes, "Gil, Debbie's pregnant, by the way." I froze. I remembered my training and remembered there was no training. I just stared like a deer in headlights and said, "Okay." Speaking of traumatic memories, there's Chris Higgins. You know she's the final girl because she's the only one with hints of depth. Some form of trauma we'll learn about soon. There's Debbie's boyfriend, Andy. He does handstands. Vera, Shelley's blind date, lucky her. And of course, Shelley himself, the prankster. In the car on the way to the country, they have some dope and pass a joint to the front passenger seat in 3D. Suddenly, the cops are behind them, so they start eating the dope. But it turns out all the impending indigestion was for nothing. The cops weren't after them. They were heading to the store for Harold and Edna. Honestly, these movies struggle most with how to be entertaining between kills. Sitcom-level antics with comforting, recognizable jokes aren't a bad way to go. A different genre of comfort food that sits nicely next to all the horror tropes. They pass the crime scene and almost run over Crazy Ralph's replacement. That was fast, Crazy Abel. He found an eyeball today, likely a leftover from Jason's work. He takes it as a sign.
He wanted me to warn you. Look upon this omen and go back from whence ye came.
Look upon this omen in 3D. Soon they arrive at Higgins Haven. Chris Higgins' family ranch. Waiting for them is her country boyfriend, Rick Bombay. You get the feeling they had a fling one of those summers when she came to visit with her family, but he hasn't seen her since. She's changed. She wants to make it work, but has a hard time returning his physical affection. All part of that trauma, the thing that happened 2 years ago. Be patient, we'll get there. Rick's flirtations are interrupted by a scream. She runs to check it out and finds Shelley with an axe in his head. That is how I'd imagine he'd scream. But he's just faking it. Damn it, Shelley. And then when everyone gets annoyed, he's like, What? What did I do? Everyone is pissed, but Vera still lets him join her on a trip to the store, and he would run like that. At the store, Shelley tosses Vera his wallet in 3D when suddenly a biker gang picks on them, which only gets worse when Shelley accidentally backs into one of their bikes. The guy punches out their windows in 3D. Now Shelley's had enough. He drives off, but first turns around and runs over their bikes, this time on purpose. You know, Shelley, maybe he is kind of cool, actually.
I did it! Did I do it?
Never mind. Back at the college, Andy is playing with a yo-yo in 3D. It's funny, behind the scenes, they talked about how difficult it was getting objects to fly into the camera just right. Like when Shelley tossed the wallet, you'd have to redo the take over and over to make sure it landed in just the right spot to get captured properly by the two lenses. I think you can often see it on their faces. Look at Andy's intense stare. That is not the look of a man playing with a yo-yo. That is the look of a man who's like, I'm gonna get this yo-yo to go in the right spot so we can stop shooting this fucking scene and we can move the fuck on. Same in a juggling scene that comes later. Check it out. Shelley is smiling, having a great time. Cut to the 3D, throw the balls at the screenshot. Suddenly, intense focus. 1,000-yard stare. I want to stop juggling, please! This was also a side effect of the type of movie they were shooting. They knew it was all about the gimmicks, the makeup effects, the 3D, so a lot more attention and priority was placed on the technical aspects of the movie, and less attention was paid to the actors, which made it a tougher shoot for them. Shelley and Vera return in their car with the broken windows. None of them notice a big burly guy watching them from the barn. No more sack on his head, by the way. Part of their motivation for getting rid of the sack this movie is that it unintentionally drew comparisons to David Lynch's The Elephant Man. The character, based on the real-life figure, Joseph Merrick, wore a very similar bag over his head, also with one eye hole. According to the director of parts 2 and 3, Steve Miner, we had finished shooting part 2 right before The Elephant Man came out, and the whole thing with the bag was just an unfortunate coincidence. The mask wasn't meant as a joke. I never wanted people to laugh at Jason. It isn't just Jason, by the way, that none of them notice. There's also the biker gang sneaking around. They've come for revenge. They're gonna steal their gasoline.
I'm just here for the gasoline.
Loco and Ali start siphoning the gas, and Fox is worried. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Then she decides to head into the barn and swing on the rope. I don't know if we should do this, guys. We might get caught. Hey, rope swing! Whee!
This feels good.
Only on one swing into the barn, she doesn't swing back out. Loco goes in to check on her and finds her pinned to a rafter by a pitchfork. Then, twist. There was a second pitchfork this whole time. So while Loco's in shock, Jason puts the other one through him too. With Loco and Fox dead, Ali comes to the barn. He finds the bodies, and then Jason jumps down, and it's cut in a way where it looks like Ali really should see him because Ali turns to look, cut to Jason landing. But then Ali picks up a machete and turns his back on Jason, and he's like, I'm gonna find you, I'm gonna kill you. Finally, he turns around to Jason, who dodges the machete attack before knocking Ali out with a wrench, then hits him 3 more times for good measure. That night at the cottage, Rick and Chris head out, Andy and Debbie head to the bedroom, leaving Vera with Shelley.
I like you a lot. I was thinking that maybe, we could...
I don't think so. Look, I'm gonna go outside for a few minutes, and then when I get back in, we'll talk.
Kind of feel bad for him now.
Sure. We'll talk. Bitch.
While she heads out, Jason heads in. By a fire outside, Chris finally tells Rick what happened to her 2 years ago. He dropped her off late one night. Her parents were pissed. Her mom slapped her. So Chris ran into the woods and decided to punish her parents by hiding all night. That's when she was attacked by a strange man with a knife. Jason, though she doesn't make that connection, so I assume these characters don't know all the stories about Crystal Lake, which makes sense considering she spent her childhood summers here. Damn it, the car battery is dead. They'll have to walk back. And there's the reveal for why Chris decided to come back to Higgins Haven. She came back to this place to, I guess, confront her trauma and show she isn't afraid. The thing is, Jason isn't a metaphor. He's a guy with a knife, now a machete, and he might still be there. So what's the plan exactly? In the Halloween Lego sequels, Laurie Strode also confronted her past trauma. With weapons. She didn't just walk into Michael's house, bringing a bunch of unsuspecting friends along with her as unwitting sacrifices to the guy who tried to kill her a couple years ago. Anyway, Chris is slightly more developed than the other final girls, but only slightly. She has a traumatic story, but it's just a backstory. It's not developed further. If there's a theme around difficulty with physical intimacy after a traumatic experience, it isn't explored at all. And why am I bringing up themes in a Friday the 13th Part 3 review? At the dock, Shelley comes up with a foolproof scheme to win the girl. Sneak underwater, grab her leg, then pop out with a harpoon and hockey mask.
Damn it, Shelley! Why do you do these stupid things?
I have to.
Wait a minute. Hockey mask. You don't think this is that the hockey mask? That's the backstory? Jason's gonna take it from Shelley. So from now on, 40 years later, every time I see Jason, be it a reboot, remake, or Universal Studios Haunted Maze, every time I see him, I'm gonna think of this guy?
They said they were going skinny dipping, and I'm not skinny enough.
Shelley sulks off to the barn. Look, I do feel bad for him, and his whole shtick could work. But it's hard to feel bad when it's so obvious he needs to change his act. Just stop scaring people. Stick with innocuous things like juggling. That almost worked for a minute.
You really are very good at that.
Or, I don't know, learn some magic tricks. You obviously have a knack for it. Actually, I knew a guy who used to go around and do magic tricks all the time as an icebreaker. He'd show up to parties with a deck of cards, and people, well, a lot of people found him obnoxious. But I still think that'd be an improvement in Shelley's case. Shelley heads into the barn looking for the potheads, Chuck and Chili. Oh, so those are their names. Meanwhile, Vera accidentally drops Shelley's wallet in the lake. She still had that? Okay, he might be a little obnoxious, but you don't rob the poor guy, and he's got a picture of him with his mom in there. How can you not feel bad for him? I think you all owe poor Shelley an apology. I never actually had a problem with him. I was just saying what I know you all wanted to hear, but I'm done pandering. Justice for Shelley. She heads into the lake to retrieve the wallet and all the cold hard cash inside it when Jason comes out and shoots her through the eye with a harpoon. Hockey mask! Finally, the real Jason Voorhees has arrived. And because he has that mask, presumably he killed Shelley off screen. Nice! I mean, how dare you celebrate poor Shelley's death? The evolution of the Jason Voorhees character is kind of fascinating and a great example of how icons come about in unpredictable ways. Jason started as a peripheral character, an excuse for Mrs. Voorhees' killing spree, a kid in a flashback, and a zombie in a nightmare. He returned in Part 2 out of the desperate need for the killing to somehow go on, and then Part 3 when he gets his iconic look. They needed a new mask, according to Peter M. Brack, who wrote and did all the interviews for Crystal Lake Memories. One of the crew members by chance had a hockey mask in his bag. They tried it on, and the director, Steve Miner, was a fan of the look. Martin J. Sadoff, the 3D supervisor, has a slightly different telling of events. He presents it less like they were looking for a mask, and more like they just didn't know what his face should look like.
So many of us were hockey players. We actually had a team. Frank Mancuso Jr. was on the team, and I had my goalie mask with me that day, and I kiddingly said, put on the goalie mask and then we won't have to worry about any makeup.
However it went exactly, the point is the same. They chanced upon the hockey mask look, and nobody could have predicted how iconic it would become. Anyway, remember how Jason just harpooned Vera to teach her a lesson after stealing from Shelley and being so mean to him? I gotta say, the casual way Jason walks away afterward is creepy, like it was no big deal. That's no different from previous kills, but usually we don't linger on Jason afterward and see his totally calm demeanor. On his stroll back to the barn, he notices a light on, where Debbie and Handstand Andy, or Handstandy, that's what the cool kids are calling him, are busy in the hammock. She gets in the shower. He handstands to the kitchen to grab a beer. Jason bisects him with a machete. When Debbie can't find him, she reads Fangoria instead. Hey, an article about Tom Savini, who did the makeup effects for the first Friday the 13th. Unfortunately, it only gets so meta. The article is real, but it's from '79, so no actual mention of Friday the 13th. It focuses specifically on Dawn of the Dead. Now, the article is actually from the first ever issue of Fangoria, even though the cover when Debbie picks it up is for issue 13, which I guess is an appropriate number for this movie. And that issue does actually feature an article about Friday the 13th Part 2. Though it's hard to read any of these articles with blood dripping onto the page. What the hell? Debbie looks up to see Handstandy's mangled corpse shoved between the beam and ceiling. Definitely the goriest effect in the movie, and it looks great, especially if you only look for a second, which, if you're watching the movie normally, you only see it for a second. But with the magic of editing, we can freeze frame and see some details, like you can see the blood is dripping out of his mouth. And that foot looks weird. No wonder he's always walking on his hands. He has a baby foot. Once she notices the body, Jason Kevin Bacons her, except this is an even more brutal kill, because it isn't a teeny little arrow, and it doesn't go through her soft neck. It's further down, closer to her chest. Also, it's kind of funny that we've dropped any pretense that Jason is doing this for some twisted form of revenge. Previously, you could at least draw a connection. A camp counselor killed my mom, so I'm going to kill camp counselors. Now it's like, a human killed my mom, so I'm going to kill any humans who come anywhere near my lake. Why does he have such an affinity for this lake that almost or possibly did kill him? He's also more sadistic, because clearly his kills in Part 2 were more methodical. Now he's cutting people in half, and he's waiting for Debbie to notice her dead boyfriend so she can feel the grief and shock first before she dies. Not to mention, she was pregnant. Okay. Meanwhile, Stoner Boy Chuck is making popcorn in 3D when the power goes out, so he goes down to the cellar for the fuse box. While he's gone, Shelly comes back with his throat cut wide open. Of course, Chili assumes it's another prank, and he dies. It's the boy who cried wolf, the boy who cried death. That is a great name for a movie. Nobody steal that. Shelley's death definitely continues the increased gore. His slit throat isn't just a line of blood, but an open gash where you see all the details of his torn flesh. It's gross and well done. When Chuck gets the power back on, oh my god, Jason is behind him. He tosses Chuck into the fuse box and he gets electrocuted. Would that really happen? Well, at the start of the scene, the camera lingers on Chuck's feet to show how he's walking through puddles of water. So, if you touch a fuse box and your feet are in water, you're basically dead immediately. Maybe, I don't know. Once Chili realizes Shelly is actually dead, she screams and runs until Jason puts a hot fire poker through her. I like how she's realized the cottage has become a death house, so she runs for the front door, then turns around because of wind? Yeah, wind is definitely scarier than a psycho serial killer. Finally, Rick and Chris make it back. In Halloween, Laurie Strode was the quote-unquote final girl because she paid more attention than everyone else. She was on high alert from the beginning of the movie, before anyone realized there was a killer around. In Friday the 13th Part 3, Chris is the final girl, because her boyfriend left the headlights on too long and let the car battery die. And she walks really slow, so by the time they get back, they've missed all the carnage. A true role model. They find the cottage abandoned. Rick goes outside to take a look. Chris tries to join him, but when she steps outside and calls his name, no answer. What a jerk. Oh, Jason's got his hand over his mouth, then squeezes his head until his eyes pop out. I gotta hand it to him. If you're gonna do 3D, eyeballs popping out of someone's head at the screen is pretty genius. It looks crazy fake. Like, if you freeze frame on that face before the eyes pop out, it's almost creepy actually, like a living doll. But it obviously wasn't meant for freeze frame, where you see the obviously fake head and string attached to the eye. For a quick second, the shot works less because it's entirely convincing and more as a, wow, that is an absurd way to kill someone. Now, Chris is on her own. She finds a flooded tub full of blood. Loco's body, I forgot about him. She calls for Rick, and Rick leaps through the window to the rescue. If only he weren't so dead. This is actually a trick Jason borrowed from his mom, who threw Brenda's body through a window in part 1. Now Jason comes through the window. She runs upstairs and empties a bookcase on him. She hides in a closet where she finds Debbie's body. Jason starts breaking down the door with an axe when Chris pulls the knife out of her friend's back and starts slashing at him. We get a more vocal Jason here. He starts grunting in pain when she slashes him, which makes him feel more animalistic. She stabs him in the thigh. That knocks him down, but he quickly pulls the knife out and throws it at her. The knife misses, and she makes it outside. Of course, he comes after her. She hits him over the head with a log, runs to the van, gets stuck on the bridge. Jason is back. She closes the window on his arms, and the chase continues all the way to the barn. I like how during the chase, you can often see where Jason is in relation to Chris. To me, that creates more tension, where you can actually see him closing in and see how intimidating he is, versus when a character runs and the killer just impossibly teleports out from corners. Inside the barn, they scuffle, and after beating him over the head with a shovel, she manages to hang him from a rope. She gets outside and opens the barn doors to see him hanging there, alive! Alive enough to reach up and grab the rope. Alive enough to remove his mask for a moment, as though to say, yes, I am alive, and yes, I am the one who attacked you 2 years ago, and now I'm going to finish the job. Except Ali is also still alive, and he comes after Jason, losing a hand in the process, and a lot of other stuff, including his life. While Jason hacks him to bits off camera, Chris puts the axe in Jason's face. Jason taking his mask off for a second while he's hanging, and then this moment where she hits him with the axe and his hands just shoot out in front of him are two of my favorite moments. They're just interesting choices for Jason's behavior. Like here, it almost feels involuntary, like he took an axe to the brain, so his muscles spasm in a weird way, but the instinct to kill cannot be extinguished. So whatever neurons remain firing, all fire toward one singular urge. Until those neurons burn out, his body remembers it just took an axe to the face, and he falls. Next, she takes after Alice and heads to the canoe. She sleeps on the water until the sun comes up. From the canoe, she sees Jason in the window. No mask, just that face covered in blood. He comes after her, and her boat is stopped by branches. She frantically tries to move them, except Jason is suddenly gone. That's when his zombie mom leaps out of the water and pulls her in. But it was only a dream. She's okay, physically at least. The cops take her away, screaming. The first two movies set up that we should expect a chair jumper at the end, with some kind of nightmare sequence. That speaks to the ritualistic nature of watching these movies I talked about earlier. Tradition requires repetition. Watching Friday the 13th every year comes with expectations. You're going to see their weird explanation for Jason's return. You're going to see him kill people in creative ways. And at the end, you'll see what weird, nightmarish twist they finish with. This one is fairly nonsensical. At no point in the movie did Chris make the connection between the person attacking her and the Jason Voorhees mythos. So why would she dream of his mother? But probing the logic of this movie won't get you far, and it does make a nice parallel to the original of young zombie Jason popping out of the water. They considered a few different endings for the movie. After she wakes up in the canoe, the original scripted ending had her going to the barn, finding all her friends dead. Then Jason shows up and she decapitates him with a sickle. But the producers didn't like such a definitive ending for Jason. They wanted to leave it open for a sequel. The next ending they considered was Chris wakes up in the canoe, runs to the lodge, and sees Rick, who should be dead. But when she opens the door, instead of Rick, she finds Jason, and he cuts her head off with the machete. And then she wakes up, it was just a dream. That's actually the ending used in the original novelization, and they did film it. But ultimately, the producers wanted to go back to the ending of the original movie, with something coming out of the water. In the end, the movie was quite successful, the biggest box office for a Friday the 13th sequel until 2003's Freddy vs. Jason. Ultimately, I kind of agree with how Roger Ebert ended his review of Friday the 13th Part 2. He put an asterisk at the end and wrote, "This review will suffice for the Friday the 13th film of your choice." Though I echo it with less snark. Like I said for my review of the first movie, Jason Voorhees is part of pop culture horror history. Watching these movies gives me such a nostalgic feeling, like going through a haunted house on Halloween as a kid, or going trick-or-treating. But these movies definitely were not made to be watched back to back like this, because watching 1, 2, and 3 in such short succession this month, I definitely feel like I watched the same movie 3 times. The important thing is, I got to see Jason with his hockey mask in all his glory. And now for this Halloween at least, my Friday the 13th journey is at an end. Or is it? Yeah, I think so. Right? Maybe. Month of Terror continues tomorrow with Terrifier 3.